From the darkest reaches of space to the deepest corners of your mind. Welcome to From the Void.
September 1980, New Mexico, Kirtland Air Force Base. It's been 25 years since something glowing and silent hovered over America's most sensitive nuclear testing range. Back then, the incident was written off, quietly filed away in a report no one was supposed to read. But now, it's happening again. This time, there are cameras, sensors, alarms, and a formal investigation by the Air Force Office of Special Investigations. What they found was never meant to be made public. But it was. A red beam of light. An object hovering above the Manzano weapons storage area. And a memo labeled, "For official use only." This is From the Void, and I'm John Williamson. In this episode, we continue our investigation into the skies above Kirtland Air Force Base, where in 1980, something returned, and this time, it left behind evidence. Kirtland Air Force Base had only grown in importance since the 1950s. By 1980, it was home to a critical portion of the U.S. nuclear weapons infrastructure. The Manzano weapons storage area, a sprawling underground facility carved into the Manzano Mountains, was operated by the Department of Energy under heavy military guard. The site contained live warheads, experimental weapons, and classified research programs. Security was tight. Surveillance was constant. And then something got through. On the night of August 8th, 1980, a guard reported a large, silent craft hovering over the storage area. It emitted a bright red beam of light aimed directly at one of the munitions bunkers. No sound, no flight lights, and no record of any authorized aircraft in the area. Moments later, the perimeter sensors triggered, suggesting a possible breach. Surveillance cameras, motion detectors, and infrared gear were engaged. The object was seen again the following night, and again on September 2nd. This time, multiple guards saw it. According to one witness, it appeared to hover just above the fence line before accelerating vertically and disappearing within seconds. The object emitted a steady red beam. Object made no noise. Radar did not detect the object. Surveillance footage confirmed presence of aerial light source consistent with witness accounts. Security logs noted electromagnetic interference. One of the cameras caught a strange, flickering distortion, described in the AFOSI report as inconsistent with lens flare or light reflection. The guards who filed the reports were all military police, some attached to the Department of Energy Security Division, others from Kirtland Air Force Base's own security wing. All of them were vetted and cleared for top-secret access. Their statements were consistent and detailed. But what's most interesting? This time, the Air Force did investigate. A formal inquiry was launched by the Air Force Office of Special Investigations, or AFOSI. Witnesses were debriefed. Security logs were analyzed. A case file was created. Report 40-479, marked for official use only. It remained hidden until the early 1990s, when FOIA requests by researchers like Peter Gertsen and Citizens Against UFO Secrecy forced its release. Inside was something remarkable. Not just a repeat of the 1955 incident, but escalation. Multiple confirmed sightings, security anomalies, and a direct visual on an object over a nuclear weapons bunker. The Kirtland base commander's own summary? Unidentified aerial phenomenon, origin unknown. And it gets weirder. Because the man who oversaw the report would later become one of the most controversial figures in UFO history. The 1980 Kirtland incident stands apart from the 1955 case in one key way. This time, the military took it seriously, at least at first. The Air Force Office of Special Investigations, or AFOSI, launched a formal inquiry. Witnesses were interviewed on site. Surveillance footage was reviewed. And a classified memo, Report 40-479, was filed on October 28, 1980. The language in the report is dry, procedural. But between the lines, there's a sense of urgency. The object was observed emitting a red beam. No conventional aircraft explanation could be confirmed. No radar return, no sound detected. Interviewed personnel consistent in observations, object described as elliptical in shape, glowing red, capable of sudden acceleration. And here's where things start to twist. One of the AFOSI agents assigned to the case was a man named Richard Doty. To some, Doty was a decorated counterintelligence officer. To others, he became the face of official disinformation. In the years following the Kirtland investigation, Doty would go on to claim involvement in a range of bizarre covert operations, including planting fake UFO documents to confuse Soviet intelligence, infiltrating civilian UFO groups, and even feeding false information to civilian witnesses as part of psychological ops. Doty admitted, on multiple occasions, that part of his role involved misleading UFO researchers intentionally. One of his most infamous targets was physicist Paul Bennewitz, who also lived in Albuquerque and believed he was recording alien signals over Kirtland and Sandia Base in the early 1980s. Rather than correct him, Doty allegedly encouraged Bennewitz's beliefs, supplying him with fabricated documents and confirmations until the man suffered a mental breakdown. Here's Richard Doty himself on the Rebelliously Curious podcast with Chrissy Newton, explaining why, even after Paul Bennewitz started showing signs of mental distress, he didn't pull back from feeding him misinformation.
Well, it wasn't my decision to do that, okay? I was told to do what the information that was contained in the operational plan, line item numbers, I did those, okay? Now, in a real world, perfect world, somebody might consider this, but number one, Paul had already seen something was highly classified. Secondly, Paul was collecting signal intelligence from something that was highly classified, okay? Number one, the things that Paul was seeing were drones, were highly classified. In the 1980s, the U.S. Air Force was experimenting with drones. Mm-hmm. They were highly classified. And these drones were being flown from an aircraft. They were launched from an aircraft, and they would fly around close to that aircraft. Paul was photographing that. He was photographing the aircraft. He was photographing these drones. But Paul didn't connect that these drones had anything to do with these aircrafts. So Paul thought these drones were UFOs. Well, that in itself, the whole thing is classified. We can't go and tell Paul this thing is. We're going to brief you into the program. Number one, it wasn't my job to do that. It would have been somebody else's job. Number two, Paul was on the base on Kirtland. We had an NSA facility, and the NSA facility back then, and this isn't classified anymore. It's been written in books. They were shooting lasers up at orbiting Soviet satellites and blinding them so they couldn't take pictures. Paul somehow was able to tap in to those signals. So that in itself is more highly classified than the drones. So those two things he tapped into, well, we couldn't certainly tell him, give him a brief.
So what does this mean for the 1980 Kirtland case? It leaves us in a strange place, with credible witnesses, classified reports, and a very real incident, tainted by a man with a long history of deception. Which begs the question, Was this a real UFO event, or part of a larger psychological operation designed to obscure what was really going on at Kirtland? So let's consider the possibilities. Possibility 1, it was a real phenomenon. A legitimate unknown craft, possibly non-human, entered restricted airspace, hovered over a nuclear weapons facility, and was seen by multiple witnesses. That would mean the Air Force couldn't explain what happened, and the disinformation was meant to contain the fallout, to manage public perception and avoid panic. Possibility 2, it was a disinformation test. Doty and others may have used a small, explainable event, say a drone or test aircraft, as a trigger point to test how false narratives spread. The red beam, the elliptical shape, the strange behavior could all have been amplified deliberately, not to cover up aliens, but to create belief in aliens and redirect attention away from real classified tech being tested at places like Kirtland, Los Alamos, or Sandia. Possibility 3, both are true. And here's the wildest theory: that real events, things that truly defy explanation, were hijacked by government actors who layered disinformation on top. In other words, maybe there really was something over the weapons storage area, and maybe someone wanted to make sure no one ever believed it. In the end, we're left with a paradox. The 1980 incident at Kirtland is one of the most well-documented military UFO encounters on U.S. soil. It involved multiple trained guards, a formal investigation, and security systems that were compromised. And yet, it's virtually unknown to the public. But why? Because the man who helped expose it also helped bury it, in confusion, contradiction, and a fog of deliberate falsehoods. So what's real and what was staged? And who benefits from the difference? What happened at Kirtland Air Force Base in 1980 wasn't an isolated event. In fact, by the early 1980s, a global pattern had begun to emerge, one that military insiders noticed but never publicly addressed. It went like this: unidentified aerial craft appearing over nuclear weapon sites, security systems failing, cameras, radar, even targeting systems, witnesses reporting structured craft, strange lights, or beams of energy, and official investigations quietly shelved, delayed, or buried in red tape. In 1967, at Malmstrom Air Force Base in Montana, 10 nuclear missiles suddenly went offline, just as security personnel reported a glowing red object hovering above the silo field. In 1966, at Minot Air Force Base, similar events occurred: radar anomalies, visual sightings, and unexplained interference with weapon systems. In 1980, just months after the Kirtland incident, U.S. airmen stationed at RAF Bentwaters in the UK encountered what's now known as the Rendlesham Forest Incident, a series of close encounters with structured craft that landed near a NATO nuclear base. All of these cases involve restricted airspace, nuclear warheads, highly trained military personnel, and no official explanation. Some of the witnesses to these events have testified publicly. Others have had their careers threatened for speaking out.
I'm not a scientist. However, for the past 39 years, I have sought out and interviewed former and retired Air Force personnel regarding classified UFO incidents that they were directly or indirectly involved in. Those incidents, in large measure, were not among the files at Project Blue Book that Dr. McDonald alluded to. He felt those documents that he did review warranted scientific investigation of the phenomenon. Of course, as we all know, I think the vast majority of scientists have ignored that plea, have continued to consider this subject without merit, to be beneath their dignity, to not be worth any effort whatsoever in terms of scientific inquiry. I would simply say that although I am not a scientist, the handful of scientists who have studied this phenomenon would beg to differ. I am going to show you a number of documents relating to my expertise, which is UFO incursions at nuclear weapons sites. By and large, the classification level of these incidents over the years precluded them being analyzed by Dr. McDonald or anyone else who did not have what is called a need to know about these particular incidents. Next slide, please. A federal law called the Freedom of Information Act has permitted over the last 3.5 decades documents to the tune of 100,000 pages that I'm aware of being released from various military and intelligence community groups within the U.S. government. What I'm going to show you now are excerpts from documents confirming that what we call the UFO phenomenon has demonstrated a distinct and ongoing interest in this nation's nuclear weapons program since the late 1940s. This first item is an FBI memorandum from January 31st, 1949. It was sent to Director J. Edgar Hoover. It was authored by the SAC, Special Agent in Charge of the San Antonio FBI office. The subject of the memo, as you can see, is, quote, protection of vital installations. Next slide, please. The first paragraph, which this is an excerpt from, indicates that in the weeks preceding the writing of this memo, a number of military and civilian intelligence groups had met to discuss, quote, the matter of unidentified aircraft or unidentified aerial phenomena, otherwise known as flying discs, flying saucers, and balls of fire. The last sentence in the first paragraph was underlined, presumably for emphasis, quote, this matter is considered top secret by intelligence officers of both the Army and the Air Forces. Now, why would this matter of flying saucers, flying discs be considered top secret? Next slide, please. The memo goes on to say, during the past 2 months, various sightings of unexplained phenomena have been reported in the vicinity of the Atomic Energy Commission installation at Los Alamos, New Mexico, where these phenomena appear to be concentrated. Next slide, please. Presumably, all of you have heard of Los Alamos. It is, of course, the birthplace of nuclear weapons. That memo, again, was from 1949. Only 4 years earlier, in 1945, Los Alamos invented nuclear weapons. A second FBI memorandum from August 23rd, 1950, goes on to say that sightings of these unexplained objects near not only Los Alamos, but another facility called Sandia Labs in my hometown of Albuquerque had occurred from the government's point of view with alarming frequency in the preceding 1.5 years. Next slide, please. The importance of this memo, in my view, is that the descriptions of the objects are described in some detail. The first category were the so-called green fireballs, objects moving at high speed in shapes resembling half moons, circles, and disks emitting green light. We now know from documents released via the FOIA, from both the Air Force, the FBI, and I believe there's even a CIA memorandum or two regarding these green fireballs. It was clear to the observers these objects were under intelligent control. They were artificial. They were described as performing maneuvers. We know also that the Air Force, as a result of these ongoing incursions at Los Alamos and Sandia, and a third site called the, drawn a blank, anyway, a nuclear weapons storage depot in Texas, that these objects quite clearly were distinctly sited around nuclear weapons facilities. They were not distributed randomly. The sightings were not distributed around the globe as one would expect from natural phenomena such as meteors. Now, Dr. Lincoln LaPaz of the University of New Mexico was secretly contracted by the Air Force to study this phenomenon. His conclusion in the declassified files was that indeed, because the majority of the observers saw these objects perform maneuvers, they were clearly not meteors or meteorites. Dr. LaPaz said that, in his view, this could have been a Russian development based on captured German technology at the end of World War II, and that indeed the Soviets may be sending these objects into American airspace to spy on our nuclear weapons program. Dr. La Paz further said that if this were not the case, that these could be top secret projects from our own government, whose classification level exceeded the persons who were investigating them. Well, over the past 50 years or so, no evidence has emerged to support either of these hypotheses. Next slide, please.
That was a clip of Robert Hastings from a talk he gave that was distributed by Society for Scientific Exploration. See, here are some final theories. Theory 1, foreign surveillance gone undetected. Maybe these were Soviet or Chinese drone platforms decades ahead of their time, targeting our weapons infrastructure to test vulnerabilities. Theory 2, extraterrestrial monitoring of nuclear capability. It's a theory that's persisted since the Cold War, that whoever or whatever operates these craft is concerned with our nuclear weapons, watching, interfering, sending a message. Theory 3, a controlled narrative of mystery. Or maybe the mystery itself is intentional. The confusion, the disinformation, the leaked but redacted documents, maybe it's all part of a strategic psychological operation. Because as long as the truth stays uncertain, there's no need to tell us what's really going on. We started with a simple report, a glowing object over a weapons lab in the desert. But the deeper you dig, the stranger it gets. In 1955, the witnesses were ignored. In 1980, they were believed, at least briefly. But in both cases, the outcome was the same. No answers, no accountability, just silence. Whatever it was, or is, happening above our most dangerous weapons, it seems the government would rather we stay curious than certain. And in that void of certainty, the questions echo louder. What's in our skies? Why are they so interested in our nuclear weapons? And why, after all these years, hasn't anyone come clean? This is From the Void. I'm John Williamson, and until next time, keep watching the skies and keep asking the questions they'd rather we forget.